Dominate to graduate. Archer High School, building a high-performance culture. Ecosystems and communities. What shapes an ecosystem? We will be looking at energy transformations, including how climate affects ecosystems, water cycles, and the biogeochemical cycles. The role of climate. What is climate? Weather is the day-to-day condition of Earth's atmosphere for a particular time and place. So that would be today's weather in Lawrenceville, Georgia. That's the weather, not the climate. The climate is the average year after year conditions of temperature and precipitation in a particular region. So the climate of Georgia and the surrounding areas. The greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect is carbon dioxide, methane, water vapor, and other gases trap heat, energy, and maintain the Earth's temperature. Without the greenhouse effect, life would not be able to survive. However, the greenhouse effect can be damaging, and that is something we'll look at later. Effect of latitude on climate. Because the Earth is tilted, different latitudes are heated at different angles. So this affects what kind of climate you have overall. In the North and South Pole, they get very little sunlight year-round, so it's very cold all the time. Because of the differences in heating, the Earth has three main climate zones: polar zones, temperate zones, and tropical zones. Heat transport in the biosphere. The unequal heating of Earth's surface drives winds and ocean currents, which transport heat. Now let's look at recycling in the biosphere. Unlike the one-way flow of energy, matter is recycled. Matter moves through an ecosystem in biogeochemical cycles. Matter is recycled because systems do not use up matter, they transform it. Remember, the law of conservation of matter is matter cannot be created nor destroyed. It can only be transformed. The water cycle. Water moves between the ocean, atmosphere, and land. The steps of the water cycle are evaporation, where water changes from liquid to a gas; transpiration, which is the loss of water from a plant through leaves; condensation, which is water vapor turns into tiny droplets; precipitation, which is in the form of rain, snow, sleet, or hail; runoff, where water comes from the mountains and hills and drains into lakes, streams, and the ocean; and infiltration or leaching, also called seeping. This is when water seeps into the ground and forms groundwater and then is recycled by root uptake. Here's your water cycle diagram. We can see that we have evaporation coming off of the lakes and ocean, transpiration, which is the water that is coming from the plants leaving from the leaves, condensation, where water vapor condenses and forms water molecules and particles that then leave the clouds and atmosphere through precipitation as snow, sleet, hail, or rain. When that rain and sleet and snow melt and run down mountains and hills, it's called runoff, and that goes into lakes, streams, and the ocean. From the lakes and the ground, there's infiltration or seepage, and that goes in and follows with the groundwater. Roots uptake some of this groundwater, and some of it is seeped or leached through into the ocean, and then it all starts over again. Please make sure that you fill this in on your diagram number 1 that you've been given. Nutrient cycles. Every organism needs nutrients to grow and function. Like water, nutrients are also transferred in cycles. There are three main nutrient cycles: the carbon-oxygen cycle, nitrogen, and phosphorus cycle, which occurs mostly in rocks and soil minerals. The carbon cycle. Carbon is released into the atmosphere by volcanic activity, respiration, and human activities. That includes burning of fossil fuels. Plants take in CO2 or carbon dioxide and use carbon to build carbohydrates during photosynthesis. Carbs or carbohydrates are passed along the food web to animals and other consumers. Carbon is found in the ocean in bones and shells of organisms and eventually break down and return to the atmosphere. Carbon cycle. Lithospheric carbon is carbon that is contained in the land. Oceanic carbon is carbon that is contained in the oceans. And atmospheric carbon is the carbon that is contained in the atmosphere or air. From the burning of fossil fuels and combustion, those release carbon back into the atmospheric carbon, back into the atmosphere. Some of the atmospheric carbon is diffused into oceanic carbon, and some is used for photosynthesis from plants. There is also biospheric carbon, which is the carbon that is inside life forms. Through respiration and metabolism, that carbon is released back into atmospheric carbon. Decomposition of plants and animals leads to more carbon in the land. Fossil fuels are used to release Nitrogen cycle. 78% of Earth's atmosphere is nitrogen gas, or N2. Nitrogen-containing products are ammonia, NH3, nitrate ions, NO3-, nitrite ions, NO2-. Nitrogen is needed for protein and nucleic acid synthesis. Converting nitrogen gas into ammonia is called nitrogen fixation. Only certain types of bacteria can do this. Plants use the converted products, NH3, NO3-, and NO2-, to make plant proteins, which is your ammonia, nitrate ions, and nitrite ions. Some bacteria convert nitrates into nitrogen gas, which is called denitrification. Please fill in your nitrogen cycle diagram. Take note of the arrows and how nitrogen is recycled through the ecosystem and biosphere. Phosphorus cycle. Phosphorus is important for the formation of DNA and RNA molecules. Phosphorus is not very common and does not enter the atmosphere. Instead, it is found mostly on land in rock and soil. As rocks and sediments slowly break down, they release phosphate. The phosphate washes into rivers and streams where it dissolves and eventually makes it to the ocean. Please fill in your phosphorus cycle diagram that you were given. What shapes an ecosystem? We'll do a quick review of ecosystems, including populations and competition, and ecological changes, including population growth and succession. Biotic and abiotic factors. Biotic is anything living. Abiotic is physical or non-living factors. An ecosystem consists of all biotic and abiotic factors. Biotic and abiotic factors continued. Biotic factors are living things that affect an organism. Biotic factors affecting a bullfrog are the plants it eats, birds that might eat it, and other species that compete for food or space. Abiotic factors are physical or non-living factors that affect organisms. A bullfrog is affected by availability of water and temperature of the air. The habitat includes both biotic and abiotic factors. Please fill in your diagram number 5. List your biotic factors and abiotic factors, and label that it is an ecosystem when both are combined. On the left side, you have biotic factors, including the trees, the grass, hawks, elk, rabbit. The abiotic factors on the right side is the land features, the water, the mountains, the air, the temperature, and when you put both of those together, you're talking about an ecosystem where it includes all biotic and abiotic factors. Habitat and niche, or niche. Habitat is the area where an organism lives. An example would be the classroom. Niche is full range of physical and biological conditions that affect an organism, including food, predators, and the temperature needed to survive. Niche is the way an organism uses the conditions in its habitat. An example is the desk that you occupy. Niche. Two species cannot share the same niche in the same habitat. Different species can occupy similar niches. An example is 3 species of warblers live in the same spruce trees but feed at different elevations and in different part of the trees. Interspecific competition. This is competition among populations of different species. An example is the warblers, which is on the next slide. Intraspecific competition is competition among members of the same species. An example of this is social hierarchy, or the pecking order in chickens. Here is another diagram. Please fill this in on your paper. You can see at the top of this spruce tree, you have Cape May warbler. This feeds at the tips of the branches near the top of the tree. Towards the center of the tree, you have bay-breasted warbler, and this feeds in the middle part of the tree. At the bottom of the spruce tree, you have yellow-rumped warbler. This feeds in the lower part of the tree and at the bases of the middle branches. These all occupy a different niche, or niche. Community interactions. Competition. This is same or different species attempt to use an ecological resource in the same place at the same time. A resource is any necessity of life: water, nutrients, light, food, or space. Competitive exclusion principle. This is no two species can occupy the same niche in the same habitat at the same time. Direct competition in nature often results in winner and loser. Losing organisms fail to survive. Predation. One organism feeds on another. The predator is the feeder. Here is a lion. Prey is the food. Here we have a gazelle. This weeds out the weakest prey and the strongest survive. Symbiosis, living together. Mutualism, both species benefit, like the bee or butterfly in a flower. Commensalism, one species benefits from the relationship, but the other is not harmed, like the example barnacles and whales. And parasitism is harmful organism. The parasite lives on another, which is the host. The host doesn't die, but it is harmed. This is an example of tapeworms and ticks. At the top you see butterfly and flower, and that's your mutualism. On the bottom you have commensalism with the barnacles on the whale, and you have parasitism on the right-hand side where that is infecting a caterpillar there. Here's just a cute little cartoon. More unusual examples of animal symbiosis. So the birds are standing on the back of a longhorn and using the horns as a slingshot and hitting the human with it. Har, har, har. Populations. Population is a group of organisms belonging to the same species living in a certain area. Terms you need to know about populations. Population size is the number of organisms in the population. Population growth. This is the increase in size of a population over time. Population density. This is the number of organisms in a certain area. And biotic potential. Highest rate of reproduction under ideal conditions. There are two types of population growth: exponential growth and logistic growth. Exponential growth has no limits on growth. There is unlimited resources. There's a constant growth rate, and the graph for this is shown as a J-shaped curve. An example is bacteria. The number doubles every generation. Logistic growth, there are limits on the growth that are present. This forms an S-shaped curve when you make a graph, and the population reaches a carrying capacity. A J-curve. J-curve is an indefinite growth of a population due to unlimited resources, food, shelter, etc., and a lack of limiting factors, which are predators, disease, competition, and other factors that decrease population growth. This forms a J-curve. This does not happen except in rare conditions for short periods of time, like bacteria in a culture. Here's an example of a J-curve. On your y-axis you have the bacteria count in thousands, and over time is on the x-axis. So you can see it's an exponential growth of bacteria, and it kind of looks like a J. S-curves. A logistic growth model forms an S-curve. This is more realistic, accounting for limiting factors. Begins with exponential growth but slows down or stops as limiting factors influence the population. Populations reach a carrying capacity, K. This is the number of individuals the environment can support over a long period of time. Again, this forms an S-shaped curve. S-shaped curve, you have region A, which is very close to exponential growth. Region B, which is declining birth rate, including the death rate. And region C is the population reaches K, which is the carrying capacity. This usually fluctuates around the carrying capacity. Limiting factors. This is anything that keeps organisms from reaching their biotic potential. Density dependent. Anything that organisms are responsible for doing. Examples are predation, parasitism, disease, food, and space. Density-dependent limiting factors are those not related to population density and are natural occurrences. Examples are temperature, water, soil, wind, and chemicals. Things that regulate population size. Predation. This creates a cycle of population increase and decrease in both populations. Predation weeds out the weakest prey and allows the strongest to survive and reproduce. Parasitism. The host does not usually die, but it does harm the host, but it aids the parasite. And disease. An example is malaria from humans and mosquitoes. Human population. 3 factors that affect population size: number of births, number of deaths, and number of individuals that enter and leave the population. Immigration is the movement of an individual into an area. Immigration starts with an I, and these are individuals that move into an area. Emigration, movement of an individual out of an area. Emigration starts with an E, along with exit. Think of this as emigration is when people exit an area. The carrying capacity is the largest number of individuals of a population that a given environment can support. Here's a graph showing carrying capacity. You can see you have biotic potential with the number of individuals on the y-axis and time over the x-axis. You reach a carrying capacity and you get to an equilibrium. It'll vary just a little bit as different factors affect the carrying capacity. Ecosystems constantly changing due to natural and human disturbances. Older organisms die out and new organisms move in. There are 2 types, primary succession and secondary succession. Primary succession happens where there is no soil that exists. This includes Hawaii, where there is constantly new land being formed through the volcanoes that are there. This is a very long process to go from no soil to a full thriving community. Secondary succession occurs after a disturbance that doesn't remove the soil. Clear-cutting forest or after a forest fire, the soil's still there, so it won't take as long to get back to its full potential. With primary succession, lichen is your pioneer species. We'll talk about this more later. Lichen usually starts on rocks and is the very beginning and helps to break down those rocks and start to form soil. Again, primary succession takes a very long time. Secondary succession is a forest fire and then the regrowth afterwards. So a forest burns down everything there, you still have your soil, but then so it won't take so long to get back to its full potential.
That's all, folks.